Hello there, everyone. My name is Bernadette Smith. I am CEO of Equality Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to our DEI Double Feature on cultural competency with my special guest, Seema Jain, founder of Seva Global. Seema, you and I go way back. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Bernadette, it is such an honor to be with you today. I always enjoy presenting with you and having great discussions. And yes, we do go way back. I think my first workshop with you was an LGBTQ wedding workshop about 10 years ago. And I sat in and learned a little bit more, and it was a phenomenal education learning. So for those of you who may not know me, I am Seema Jain, and I am here in Dallas today, actually calling from one of my clients' offices. Um, I have been in this industry of hospitality for a while and doing cultural competency probably for the last 10 years, but that was not my original background. I am an Indian American, first generation born here, and my parents came in the 60s, and my father told me basically that I could be a doctor, engineer, lawyer, or business person. Those were pretty much the only choices that we had back in that time. So I took a finance path. So many people wonder, how did a finance nerd turn into a cultural competency advisor? And the story is can be attributed to Marriott International, which is where I worked prior to my own company. So while I was at Marriott, I was in the sales team and realized organically on my own that if I am culturally competent and can take care of my guest based on their cultural needs, I can drive sales. And that story in 2008 is what I created. And later on, a few years later, they created a job at the corporate level saying, what you did for one hotel of able to turn the sales and bring people in because you were culturally competent, we'd like you to do that now for more hotels. So that's how I started the career. And then a few years ago with the pandemic, I decided that it might be time to take this cultural competency knowledge and spread it with other industries and other companies. And of course, Marriott is still my first love, and I enjoy working with them very much. But it's nice to know that there's other companies in IT, telecom, finance that also need to understand how to take care of their employees of different backgrounds, their customers of different backgrounds, vendors and owners, as we live in a different world today. So that's a little bit of how I got into this space, Bernadette.
I love that story, and I think your passion for this really, really comes through loud and clear. And I've attended your workshops, and you're so dynamic. You're really funny. Have great examples. So I'm really excited for this conversation
Yeah,
because, we've talked, before in like 15-minute spurts on 5 things in 15 minutes, but this is the time to really dig into this stuff.
absolutely.
So let's just get started with a simple question, which is, how are you actually defining cultural competency?
Sure. So, is this something we'd like to maybe even ask our audience to start thinking about as
Yeah,
well? And maybe we
sure.
can get their definitions and ideas. So, if they'd like to comment in the chat box, that would be great to see what people think about this buzzword cultural competency that's out there. So, for those of you who are able to do so, please let us know what you think as well.
Absolutely. I think it's a great question for everyone because it is kind of a buzzword, and I think that there are probably some misconceptions about what it means. So yeah, I think it's a great question. I would love to see what folks have to say about this term.
Terrific. And while they're thinking about it, there's other acronyms that also get used with cultural competency. Some people say cultural fluency, cultural quotient, CQ, cultural intelligence. So there's many words that come along in the same subject matter. But basically, the way I look at cultural competency is understanding and being able to effectively interact with people of a different background. It's understanding you yourself, your beliefs and values, but then finding the positives in other cultures as well. And that's the key that defines it for me, is finding positives in other cultures and respecting the differences. So we're not all thinking of the same, but it's okay to be different, and there's nothing right or wrong about that. So I'd love to see what people are, thinking about it. But it is, as I told you, Bernadette, this is not something that is a soft skill. It's really a must skill if you want to survive in today's global world and such a dynamic, changing environment that we're in every day.
Absolutely. And I see a few different comments here in the chat, being aware of all your staff differences He's here to learn. So
Yeah, we love it.
he's waiting for the answer. Dave said having EQ, emotional intelligence, that's absolutely a huge part of it.
Absolutely.
Lynn uses the term CQ. So can you
Mhm.
actually, would you say those terms are all interchangeable?
I think people do use them interchangeably. So CQ is, how do we increase our cultural quotient, right? What are we doing each day? And at the end of the conversation today, I hope to give you some takeaways of things you can do right away to become a little bit more culturally aware. So I think in society, we do kind of interchange them. I like cultural competency, but I've heard all these words at the same time.
Yeah. So what is the most succinct way you would describe it? So in
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So the most succinct way is I describe it is basically is how do you effectively interact with people of a different background? Again, looking at yourself, understanding your culture, but then respecting another person's point of view. And I think that's the trick to the whole thing is realizing that not everybody's going to think like you. So how do we respect and reorient our mind to think like somebody else?
Absolutely. And I think that that actually aligns really well with a comment here from Sharitha. Awareness and understanding that there are differences within various cultures
Mhm.
and the ability to navigate and support those differences. Uh,
Love it.
and we have a question here. What is EQ? So that's emotional intelligence or emotional quotient, right?
Correct. Emotional quotient. And that's something that's used a lot in schools today. So we've heard of IQ. Bernadette, you and I grew up knowing what is IQ, your intelligent quotient, defined by, test scores. But emotional quotient is even more important, I think, in today's world, especially after, COVID and things that we've gone through in the last 4 years, is making sure that we are strong on an emotional level. And I think that's even more important than the IQ at times. And a lot of schools do look at that nowadays as how are you on your emotional level? And that is a important tool that people are using today as well.
Well, I think certainly COVID and all of the ramifications and side effects of COVID
Hmm.
sort of required us to kind of admit what we didn't know. You know, what we
Correct.
don't know about each other, about differences in how we live and work, and how people are thriving or not. And so, I think that EQ became a really important skill to have in the pandemic era in particular, and I think it's hopefully something that folks have been started to develop a greater capacity for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So these are great comments here, by the way. So
Hmm.
please feel free to
We love
keep
it.
asking questions and comments. I have another comment here: awareness and understanding of different attributes, which affirms and values differences.
Perfect.
Great
Yeah,
comment
Bernadette
as
and I
well.
love it when you guys comment on the chat box because we love the engagement that we get with this. So thank you for that.
Sure, absolutely. So Seema, you have a question for me, right?
I do have a question. Since you asked me about my passion topic of cultural competency, I want to ask you about your passion topic of DEI. And what does DEI mean to you and what does that look like? And I know you wrote a book last year, which is amazing, your Inclusive
Back
360. Yep, back there. And I've got a bunch of those I give to gifts to my colleagues and clients. And it's a phenomenal book if you haven't read it or bought it already. But so what does it mean to you, Bernadette? You're in a different space than what you probably grew up with and not thinking you'd be a DEI advisor or expert, but what is it to you?
Sure. So I'll just start with defining the letters. So the letters are diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes you might see DEIB, which includes belonging. Sometimes you might see a J, which includes justice. There are a variety of variations. D, as far as is diversity. So diversity, as far as I'm concerned, is just as simple as differences. Lots of different kinds of differences, lots of different ways to be in the world. In this case, we're just talking about differences in people. So whether it's skin tone, sexual orientation, neurodiversity, all of the ways, age, so many different ways we can be diverse.
Mhm,
Equity is the E, and equity is about giving all of those diverse folks a fair shot to succeed.
mhm,
And we know that a lot of them have been historically marginalized and historically underrepresented in organizations. And equity is about giving folks a fair shot, even when especially when they come and bring disadvantages and
mhm.
come from experiences of racial wealth gap and all of the inequities. And
Correct.
inclusion is giving all of those diverse folks a voice and giving them a space where they feel like their voice actually matters within the organization and beyond. So that's
Mm.
my simple definition of diversity and equity and inclusion. And I think that it's really important that we're having these conversations because do think that DEI and cultural competency go hand in hand. I know you've said they're sort of two sides of the same
Mhm.
coin. Do you think that do you see them as, when I think of DEI, I think more of the systems within the organization. So everything
Mhm.
from hiring to procurement to product design, there's all of these different systems in which we need to consider diversity, equity, and inclusion. And cultural competency would you consider it a systems approach, or is it a more of it's a people approach, or can you
Mhm.
have culturally competent systems? Getting a little bit ahead
Yeah.
of ourselves. But I
Yeah, no,
just
that's a
came up.
yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the space that I'm working in where I see the most results coming in is when companies are realizing that our teams that they're working with at the table, right, are not all looking like themselves, right? You're good. And you shouldn't. No team should ever look the same. We want the teams to be diverse because we know that diverse teams rise above. They'll be financially successful, as studies have shown. But I think that in the space that we're in, cultural competency, it is just an extension of your work, Bernadette, right? When people say, I need unconscious bias training, I need this, that's traditional DEI work that we do. And cultural competency, we have cultural biases out there as well. There's different things. So, working together, we hope that we can never fully eliminate bias. We know that we're human, but we try to reduce it and try to be self aware of how to do this. So, the cultural competency angle is such a perfect tie in to an organization that is trying to be a little more holistic, that is trying to approach things in a different way, because now you're not looking at only at training on a certain traditional topic, which is wonderful and needed, but you're going above and beyond and thinking different ways. One of my things that I love is I never want to talk about really a negative about a culture because that's always out there. You can find that. I want to encourage the positives of a
Mhm.
culture. And I want to sit there and let people know, listen, we in America, we might do it this way, but another country, they might do it something different. And even though it's different, doesn't mean it's bad. It could be something we can learn from and actually improve ourselves by learning at something unique from a different culture. So I try to promote all the positives that we can see in a culture and why is it they do things the way they do. So you have to understand that mindset. So I think our work goes so hand in hand. And I love the fact that I can refer you, you can refer me because we have our specialties, but they do need to integrate to really be complete for any organization.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and we're gonna continue to dig into that and get more specific about what that actually looks like. But, there's a great question here in the chat that sort of goes along with the next question I have for you, which is how is being ethnocentric
Mm,
a barrier to cultural competency? And we have a question from Dave here, or a comment about how
okay.
we should be aware of cultural ethnocentrism. So what does that
That's,
actually how do you
oh,
define it, and how is it a barrier?
right. So, Dave, that's a great question. And as we know, I mean, at most, if you don't know, at least I hope you realize that in America, we're perceived to be a very ethnocentric culture, right? It's about us. It's a lot about what we think. We're not always so um, open minded to think that other cultures could have a different way, and that's okay. And I think what's interesting when I work with people and I teach these workshops is to realize, take a moment and realize that what you do is great, but that somebody else could be doing something in a very different way, and that's perfectly okay. So, let me give you an example. My cousins, I'm from India, they'll come over here, and we think that they have an accent when they speak, right? They'll come to me and they're like, why do you guys in America have accents, right? We don't have one in India, but why do you have one? And I sat there and I thought, wow, I never really thought of it that way because we in America think the world has an accent and we never think we do. So looking at from a different lens is really helpful to understand, especially when you think of language barriers, that even I might have difficulty understanding someone with an accent. Can you imagine how they think about our accent? And they're having difficulty as well. But no, we don't stop to think that way because that's the ethnocentric part of our culture. So taking a moment to realize punctuality differs around the world. I took some clients out yesterday for Indian lunch, and they're like, "Is it spicy?" I'm like, "Oh." that depends, right? Spiciness differs around the world. So everything we think, we have to think from other people's lenses, and that will help us not be so ethnocentric. To just
I
look at another person's viewpoint.
I think that's easier said than done.
It is easier said than
Do
done.
you have any, like, do you have any quick tips to help Americans be less selfish and and ethnocentric?
No, and the thing is, there we are. It is a great culture, and I think it's over the years I'm even learning. Even though I've lived in two cultures my whole life, very proud of my Indian heritage. Love the American dream that my parents came here in the '60s and gave us. Both have phenomenal things to offer. I think the first and foremost is to when we talk to someone of a different culture, or speak to someone of a different background, just to realize that not everybody will always think like us. So, great example. I have a meeting planner friend. She goes to Spain. She comes back and she tells me, "Oh, yeah, the meeting was great. Everything worked out. But all the kids are running around really late at night." And I said, "Well, what's wrong with that?" She goes, "Well, they should be in bed." And I said, "But according to whom?" According to American culture, we put our children to bed before the sun goes down. But in other cultures, they have their children up late and nothing is wrong or right. Their lifestyle might be later. They might get up later. It's just a different lifestyle. She said, "Oh, I never really thought about that." So take a moment sometimes to realize that, okay, what we do might be fine for us, but other people have a different way as well. And it's perfectly okay. That works for their culture. So it's got to be open-mindedness. That's really the trick, is to think differently. Take a moment and just think differently.
So not only are we ethnocentric, but we're judgmental as well.
At times, yes, we are. And I have to tell you, I have to make a comment that when my cousins came to this country and they come here and they visit, and I will ask them, "Hey, so what do you think about Americans? Like, what do you think about us people? What do you think?" I love to hear their perception, right? And one of them actually said to me, she said, "You guys are a little bit sensitive and a little bit more drama." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" Just, "Well, it's like if I say something, you guys get offended and things like that." I said, "Wow, maybe you're right. I never thought about that. But in other cultures, some of them are thick skinned and it's different. It's all different wherever you go." So it's interesting. Ask a friend sometimes if you get a chance who's of a different background, who's visiting, what their perceptions are. And they have many great perceptions. People are warm, they're friendly, they're smiling, they love all the good. But it was interesting to hear that she felt that we were a little more sensitive. I said, "Oh, I never thought about that." So I learn every day.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, where you stand depends on where you sit. It's everything's a matter of perspective, right?
It is perspective.
All right, so I have a great question here in the comments. Does competency imply an optimal state, such as becoming cultural competent? And if so, is that possible? Aren't we always in a state of learning?
We are definitely in a state of learning. And if you're not, that's a problem, right? Even me, even you, we might be thinking we are continuously learning. I always tell my students, when you think you know it all, come back because we need to keep thinking of how to elevate. You should never stop. You should never stop. And when we've done this, we got to improve it and think of how to elevate at the same time. So I agree. I mean, this is a topic, whether it's DI, unconscious bias, whatever the topic is, always think of how to keep growing, elevating yourself, and improving. We're a student for life. We are a student for life.
And we have all these great people here today joining us. And you're students, you're learning right now, we're all
Mhm.
learning, and you're taking time on a Friday afternoon, by the way,
Right?
so props to you for being here.
Absolutely.
So let's actually get to some really tangible takeaways. So, Seema, what do cultural competency norms look like in a hybrid world?
Sure. So, when we do now, after Zoom has been popular and Microsoft Teams and all these methods, it is sometimes challenging when body language is a big part of how we communicate, and we can't always see that on a Zoom call, right? I can't always express. What happens is when we don't have our camera on, it's difficult to see what that person is thinking. right? We don't have the full picture and we're just hoping it's there. So to the best we can, I always like to have my cameras on for people just to see their reaction. Are they nodding their head, things like that. But one of the biggest challenges is when you are having language barriers and you're working with someone where English is maybe not a proficient language and they are having difficulty in understanding. Because remember, I have the accent, I'm the American with the accent, and it may not be easy for them to understand my more hurried or not so enunciated American English. So, things we can do is just always make sure, whether you're in person or hybrid, obviously, is to make sure that we take some time to speak in a very clear form, helping others. So if I'm speaking to somebody, I want to make sure they can understand me. I'm trying to understand them. But if we just take a little time and patience and just slow down and speak clearly, that can help alleviate a lot of problems. Think about it. Imagine that you're doing a project and you have a deadline, but there's a lost in translation because we didn't take the time to really understand what the messaging was. So then you lose 3 days, you're behind now, not to mention if you're in a hybrid world with time zones and you're now a day behind because India or China might be 12, 14 hours ahead. All of these add to problems that can increase or reduce your efficiency, your velocity, your productivity on any project. So it's important to always ask, hey, this is what I understand, or please repeat what you think you heard. Taking just 5 extra minutes can make such a difference when you're trying to make sure that the productivity is going to be what you expected. So taking time is important. Patience is important. And that's something we may not have because we are sometimes the hurried American and we want to do everything quickly. But that slows things down. And what we feel is hurried might actually ruin our deadline because we missed the message. We missed the message. So taking a little time, taking time to speak properly, to speak slowly, to speak clearly, and making sure that the recipient is well aware of the messaging that you're trying. So maybe just asking something as simple as, please repeat to me what you heard, because maybe they heard differently than you intended. And so that can cause and avoid a lot of stress.
That's a great tip. I love that tip. Well, we talked about the hybrid world. What do some cultural competency norms look like when it comes to meetings and events in the hybrid world? I mean, you do
Yeah.
a lot of work with meeting planners
Mhm.
and CVBs, convention visitors bureaus and associations. That you're still in the hospitality industry with
Correct.
some of your clients.
Mhm.
What are some of the norms that you're seeing? And I know this
Yeah.
is your extra area of expertise.
Absolutely, absolutely. So obviously, being inclusive in the space we are, we want to make sure that our attendees who are not with us in person and they might be on a virtual platform, that they also get to engage with us and not feel left out, right? So what can we do? So for example, yesterday I had done a session on an India culture, and we took some of the class to a Indian grocery store, Indian restaurant, giving them the cultural immersion. Now, not everybody could be there. So, to be respectful and to be cognizant that they couldn't attend for whatever reason, we brought snacks back for them. So, here we go to the grocery store and we buy the little Indian instant cardamom tea packets that they can put in their break room and still feel they got to experience the culture. Also, was able to buy them, some cookies that they could enjoy with their tea. So, always thinking that person couldn't join. What can I do to still give them that cultural experience? And if there's a hybrid that they were coming from different, well, I can mail them a little package, mail them something before the event. So when I'm doing a coffee break in my class, they can still, or a chai break in this case, they can also take a break and have the same feeling that they are still with us. So creating a small amenity, a small package, delivering it to them before, so they felt that connection when they come in on a hybrid basis.
Excellent. And what about for in-person events? So
Mhm.
for the big conferences and annual meetings, how would you make those more culturally competent?
Oh, so that's one of my favorite things to do, Bernadette. We add all types of elements. So when we are teaching a culture, let's say we were doing India, we could do things from a Bollywood dance class immersion in there, a little bit of yoga in there, have a henna artist. When I've done Brazilian classes, we have a little samba dancing. So between all of our five senses, we want to make sure that music is incorporated into our classroom, that the food of the culture we're working on, and we do 12 different cultures, we incorporate that as well, that the clothing, the materials, the things we wear, we try our best to bring the culture to our workshop, since I can't always take everybody to that culture. Would love it if companies could budget for a field trip to, let's say Germany or to Japan or something, but we can't do that. So I bring in things through all five senses that they can experience. And of course, food is one of the most important ones, as everybody loves to try some new foods from a different culture.
Yeah, I've heard you say before that food is one of the fastest ways to get to know a new
Hmm.
culture, and I think that that's great, and I think it's true. I mean, I'm thinking about my own experiences. It's certainly true, even when it's a little scary at first. It's
Yeah.
fun. Like there's
Yes.
a sense of adventure to it.
Absolutely, and I tell people, challenge yourself. Go try a food that you can't even pronounce. You don't even know how to say, or ask a colleague, "Hey, I've never tried, let's say, Vietnamese pho, and I'd really like to try it. Can you please take me to your favorite restaurant and teach me?" And everybody, here's the truth, Bernadette, if most people are very proud of their heritage and culture, most people are, and they like to share. So take advantage and ask a colleague today, "Hey, I'd love to learn something about your culture, or can you take me here?" I've done everything from go to synagogues, mosques, to learn about different cultures. I've done things, grocery stores of different cultures. Any way, from movies, podcasts, everything I can do to learn, because I can't always travel to the destination, but there's many things I can do to enhance my own learning of a culture.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And honestly, I think that and I talk about this in my own work on allyship. I think that a lot of us are afraid of getting it wrong and we're afraid of accidentally offending someone and
Hmm.
we've all heard the microaggression. So where are you from? Oh, like where are you really from?
Hmm.
So
We've
Seema, if
seen that.
someone if I don't know if you've personally experienced that microaggression, someone's trying to find out, where your country of origin
Right.
is or where your parents
Yeah.
were born and asking you where you're from. Well, you can say Ohio, right?
Right. Right. And
Um,
no,
and I
that's a
was going to say kind of a better question to ask is what is some of the food that you enjoyed celebrating as a kid or what holidays did you enjoy celebrating growing up?
love it.
And you can start
Love
to
it.
build that dialogue and start to build rapport with folks by
Hmm.
bonding over holidays and food, even if they're different from how you grew up. And you can sort of get to that question, well, where are you from? That the burning question that a lot of folks have without actually
Right.
asking that question.
Yeah. You know what, Brenda, that's a great way. I love how you segue that into learning. I think one advantage I do have is being Indian American or an immigrant. When I ask that question, I don't think people get as offended because they know I'm already from a different background at times. But the one thing is you can let it sit, right? Like, so if you say, "Where are you from?" and they just say California, and they don't want to go beyond that, you can let it be, right? But some people say, "Oh, yeah, I'm from Ohio, but my family is originally from India." I went ahead and extended. So you kind of have to read the person you're working with to see what level they're interested. Some love to tell you, some don't, and that's okay. Whatever their comfort level is. So it just you have to read the signs and understand what they're saying. But I love how you say it because I think it's great. You know what holidays they celebrated, what types of foods they ate growing up will tell you a lot about their background and also their pride in their background as well.
And it becomes a conversation starter, right? And I think that
Absolutely.
so many of us are afraid of saying the wrong thing
Right.
to someone who's different from us. And
Right.
so we don't say anything and we don't really get below the surface. So I think
Yeah.
those sort of slightly deeper questions, they're not vulnerable
Yeah. No.
questions,
And
but
and
they open up
one thing I learned,
back some layers.
absolutely. And Brenda, one thing we've learned is I think if we all just change our mindset to realize that we will make a mistake. Okay, we're
Sure.
humans. We are going to make a mistake. We cannot generalize everybody in a population. I can teach about China, I can teach about Japan, I can teach, but you really can't generalize. So if we go in the mindset that, okay, we will make a mistake and that's okay because it's how you rectify it, right? How do you apologize? How do you take it? But the one thing I've learned is If you ask with your authentic, genuine self and truly ask with good intention, 95% of the people are receptive. Okay. I'm going to make a mistake one day. I'm going to maybe say the wrong pronoun to somebody, even if they, and we learn over time. But I think the risk of this is so low that go in with the right heart, the right empathy, the right genuineness and authenticity, and 95% of the people are going to be okay. You will always have a one off. You will. That's how our world is. But we are always afraid, like you said, to ask the question, oh my God, I might offend somebody. This is how we walk, eggshells. But take the risk sometimes, because if you do it with the right intention, most people are receptive. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. We're human. You rectify, you apologize once, you apologize sincerely, and you move on. But it is going to happen.
Yeah, it is going to happen. But I also would, just want to say that to folks that I think it's also really important to know that there could be an impact. So, and you
Yeah,
don't, first of all, you don't want to make assumptions. So asking is
good
definitely
point.
the best approach. But if you get it wrong, there could be an impact, and you just have to take responsibility for that. And yes, apologizing sincerely and moving on quickly is the best way. But your
Mhm.
intention, even though it's good, it might not equal the impact of how it's heard or
Right.
perceived. Or, and I think that question, "Where are you from?" is a good example of that. It seems
Hmm.
like such an innocent question, but for a lot of people, it becomes a microaggression because of how the perception is that, I'm asking someone who's Asian, "Where are you from?" The answer could be Ohio, but the answer that I'm secretly hoping for, well, is it
It's India.
Vietnam or China? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's
Right.
like,
Right.
and so, some people really are, it can, question in particular can be dicey for folks, can be a
Absolutely.
all right, so let's keep going. So we think that this is really important on an interpersonal level, but how can organizations actually embed these concepts of
Right.
cultural competency and DEI? I mean, embedding the concepts of DEI is what I do.
Right.
But how do you embed cultural
Yeah.
competency within an organization?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, Brenda. And I think one of the things that I've realized is working with so many companies over the last few years is I think people tend to um, try to have really big dreams and they want to do a lot. And what I tell them is you can start with small steps, and those small steps will lead to great strides. But whatever you do with your company on a cultural competency level, just make sure it's culturally sustainable, that you can do it all the time. So if you decide that we're going to celebrate Pride or Black History Month or something, whatever initiatives you'd like, it's important to note that whatever baseline you start with or you do, that people will watch that. Why did you cut it back next year? Or how are you going to keep it up? So it's better to do things in smaller increments that are sustainable and build upon that than trying to put everything together that first year and then having to scale back, because people will wonder, well, why did you scale back my holiday? I think the easiest thing right now is we work in a global world where everybody in your team is of a diverse background. Why not start off with something simple as cultural celebrations, right? Whether it's Lunar New Year, whether it's Ramadan. We have Hispanic Heritage Month coming up September
Mhm.
15th. We have our Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, whatever they are, Diwali or Kwanzaa. We want to make sure that maybe that's a small way to start recognizing holidays, having people who celebrate that share their holiday with the team, and making it a celebration for the company. Today's generation, the Gen Z, Bernadette, I don't know if you work with some, but I have one on my team and she's very powerful, and I appreciate her very much for her unique diverse perspectives into my organization. But the Gen Z today, Bernadette, it's not like you and me when we went to get a job. When I was back in the day 30 years ago getting a job, it was all about salary and benefits. This new generation is looking at companies very differently, actually in a more holistic way. And I appreciate them for doing the research, for looking at who they want to work for. They're not looking at just DEI efforts and cultural competency efforts. They're looking at everything from corporate social responsibility, sustainability efforts. What's your purpose? What are your communities you serve? They're looking at the companies that do good. And that is the difference between our generation and the new one. And I thank them for helping us be a little bit more looking at ourselves, even in the mirror as an organization, to say, do we do all of these things? Because that's what's attracting the next generation. By the way, that next Gen Z, they are 50% people of color, right? So it is coming and our landscape is changing in this country. We want to be very mindful of how somebody might have had their family dynamics might be different than my family dynamics, but what's important to them. So simple things to start off is maybe cultural celebrations and heritage months, and just recognizing those at whatever level capacity that your company can do to be culturally sustainable.
I think that's a great idea. It's sort of low hanging fruit. It doesn't need to
Hmm.
be a big expense. It can be something that is rolled out organization or company wide. It's something that it should be done authentically. So let's
Correct.
get that right. So I think that that's
Hmm.
the key here with the cultural celebrations is that, it shouldn't be, there shouldn't be a feeling of tokenism. There shouldn't be a feeling of the Juneteenth ice cream that Walmart like that Walmart unveiled. The types of
Yeah. Yep.
decisions that feel out of alignment. So I would say that unless your organization is really first of all, I think that celebrating the heritage months is really important, but I also think that you could be called out if your organization isn't doing other things as well. So for
Correct.
example, right, if you have a company that's celebrating Juneteenth, but they're not doing any making any efforts to improve the way they promote their BIPOC employees, there
Hmm.
can be a calling out or a lack of alignment. So I think that it's important for there to be an alignment with the cultural competency and the celebrations that you're talking about with what the organization is actually doing policy wise
Hmm.
to promote, include, and otherwise embed DEI
Yeah.
throughout the rest of the organization. So I think there's a real important to have that alignment there.
Yeah, I love it, Bernadette. And I know, like, my oldest daughter works for a great NGO in New York, and they had been celebrating Juneteenth way before it became even a holiday or recognized. And I think that's really powerful to say that, companies doing good things. They have been celebrating for years before. The other thing is, I know there's companies that, just speaking on that particular holiday, where they're like, okay, no meetings allowed that day, but here's some coursework that you can sign up for to learn more about the holiday. Or they'll send things like, here's some good movies to help you learn, or here's some good so they give things to tools and resources to their employees to help them learn more about that holiday, whether it's Api or Black History Month, whether it's Pride. What can you do that doesn't really even cost money, but can help you learn more about that heritage month? So I agree. It's, and somebody mentioned authenticity. That is the key. Whatever companies do, it should be that they're doing it with their authentic heart. And that's what is going to be noticed by people who are looking into working for these companies, right? The talent acquisition that you're going to get.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we see another comment here, celebrating Pride but not Juneteenth, and they're in the same month. By
Mhm.
the way, if your company is putting up rainbow logos on Pride but doesn't have inclusive HR benefits for
Yeah.
for LGBTQ people and, transgender inclusive healthcare coverage, all of that kind of stuff at a minimum, by the way,
Mhm.
then that shows a lack of authenticity and a lack of alignment.
Correct.
So making sure that there's the connection there, I think is really key for this to be effective. So so Seema, what does a organization that has a high degree of cultural competency look like? What is this?
Yeah.
Let's get even more specific here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, I had worked with Marriott International for years. The fact that they took what I did for one small hotel, the cultural competency story, learning that if I appeal to cultural needs and that would appeal to the guest, and we're a hospitality company that welcomes all, the fact that they took that and created a position at the corporate level was first and foremost, right? Not everybody in the industry did that, but they valued that we need to make sure our team members are understanding how to be more culturally competent so they are culturally confident when they're working with people of a different background. As you know, guests in hotels are of all different backgrounds. And so having that as just saying we're going to invest in somebody to create a program for a Fortune, 100 company is amazing, right? To do that. I'm also going to give a shout out to my husband's company, Amazon. They do some phenomenal work at their company as well. A lot of learnings that they do, great webinars that they put out for their team. And I know he's always giving me some great ideas as well that he does in there. And I think we even talked about, how people are tying their bonuses nowadays, right? To how many people are on the team of people of color. So people are coming up with new ways to make sure that how are we being culturally competent? How are we making sure our teams look diverse, are diverse, and genuinely are diverse because we know diverse teams will bring different perspectives, new innovation to our company. So don't do it to check a box. Do it because it's the right thing to do. That's the reason you do it. So yeah, I mean, there are many companies, and I think, Bernadette, this is just the beginning. I think in the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot more companies just integrate this into their departments where they're not going to have, maybe a cultural competency, VP, but they're going to say this is part of how you should be doing things, right? And set each department for success.
Well, I think that's actually a great segue to the next question, which is about how you're using cultural competency to advance and sustain DEI efforts. And I think that you're right. I think that it should be embedded. It should be part of every conversation. It's something that should be part of every department, every agenda. When it becomes part of the fabric and part of the conversation in a normal way, as opposed to
Mhm.
this sort of like extra thing or separate
Right.
thing, when it becomes just normalized and embedded and it starts to become accepted because it's always there, right?
Correct. Correct.
then I think we start to see more sustainable efforts. But it
Agree.
does require that organizations take and leaders and managers at every level start to take ownership of that and make
Correct.
sure that it's embedded. Integrated is the word you use, and I think that's the
Yeah.
perfect word.
Right. And it's interesting. So when I started teaching 14 years ago on multicultural, I told people that this is a topic. Remember, when back in the school, we'd have a class on technology. Like it was just a separate class. But technology today is embedded in everything we do, right?
Yeah.
We can't live. It is the way we work. I wanted it to be that multicultural, cultural competency is just the way of life now, the way we think. And that's the way I know the students in colleges today, the coursework they're taking, the types of classes they are offered that I wasn't offered is such a great prep for them as they go into this world that's now all global. Everybody's working with people of different parts of the world. So I think, like you said, it's important that it just becomes seamless into an organization and it just becomes the part of the way they think. It should just be the norm. So when the young or the new talent starts coming into these organizations and they can see this and they're asking questions, they can see that it's going to be a big game changer for them when they make decisions on who they want to work for. Companies that do that good work, it's not isolated, it's part of our everybody's department goals type of thing. And you've heard of SMART goals, right? Sustain SMART is specific, measurable, actual, results oriented, timely. Those SMART goals, if each department just took one SMART goal to achieve the company's larger goal, it would be great to see. And then people have that accountability. It's something also to ask people. So what does DEI look like to you? Right? We at the DEI level think we know it, but maybe DEI is different to everybody. And it'd be interesting to see from your associate's lens, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. And I think it's something, what you pointed out is something that I think folks should really be aware of, especially if you do any interviewing or hiring or
Hmm.
recruiting, because, I have a friend who's interviewing right now. And she tells me that in every interview, she specifically asks the interviewer, "So, what does your company do around diversity, equity, and inclusion?" She's asking that question. So,
Perfect.
everyone on the interviewer side should be prepared to answer that question. And by the way,
Right.
my friend who does that is my age. So,
Yeah,
and
that's great though. And
it
and
is,
and
and it matters to her because she knows what it's like to not have inclusive cultures, and she knows what it's like to experience microaggressions on a daily basis, right? And
right.
so it's important to her, And I think that we're certainly seeing that it's much very, very, very important to Gen Z and millennials as well, even though she and I are both Gen X.
That's okay.
It matters. It matters. And I
Yeah.
think being able to answer that question in an authentic way is important. And she has told me some of the some of the answers that she's received from interviewers, which have just made her feel like they don't get it, and that
Wow.
it's not an environment where she's going to feel supported and welcomed.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely made clear to her on a couple of occasions.
Wow. Love
Yeah.
it. I love that the interview is now a two-way interview almost, right? It is not always about me asking, they need to ask these questions. So you're right. Everybody needs to be prepared. If somebody says, what are you doing to recognize other cultures in your company? It looks like your company has a lot of diversity. What do you do to help recognize and make people aware and promote the positives of all the cultures? So it's okay to ask some hard questions. I think it's good. And I think it's important to do so. It's important to do so.
And I think that a lot of recruiters and interviewers and hiring managers and a lot of other folks should be getting this kind of training.
Yeah,
Be prepared to answer these questions because you are the face of the brand on the
absolutely.
HR side, at least.
Yeah. And
Um,
one thing,
mhm.
another thing, Bernadette, that's interesting is when you look at the interviewers, like if I'm going for an interview and I see 5 people I have to interview, I want to make sure that those interviewers that I'm going to be talking to also are diverse, not 5
Mhm.
that all look the same. There should be, male, female, different generations, different backgrounds, ethnicities, because I think that's more reflective and I think that's good. So make sure that the interview panel that you're setting up is also quite diverse, also. And that if you're ever doing a panel at your company, definitely make sure that it's not all one same sex. It says, making sure your panel has a diversity of whatever you can do for that panel, but keep these things in mind. Keep these things in mind as we move forward.
Those are all great examples of something that every organization can certainly start to work on.
Right.
So we have I have a final question for you, but folks, please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat. We're going to definitely give you some space to get your questions answered as well. But my last question for you today, Seema, is what's one specific thing that every individual who's watching can do to be more culturally competent? So forget about their organization. What's something
Sure.
that they can do as an individual to grow?
Absolutely. Oh, what a great question. And the thing is, people think it takes money. Bernadette, it doesn't. It has to take an open mind and a willingness to want to learn. That's the key. So the easiest thing today, in a silver lining of the pandemic, how many podcasts have come out, right? And
Mhm.
how many people started reading books and movies, but try to expand your traditional thinking on podcasts and maybe listen to a podcast or watch a movie or read a book of somebody of a different author, of a different ethnic background or a different background. So instead of reading traditional, maybe American authors, maybe I'm going to read books of a Chinese author or a Middle Eastern author or a Brazilian author, just to learn about different cultures. So that's one thing that's super easy to do. Another thing is ask a colleague of a different background. Hey, I'd love to learn more about your culture. Could we go out for a dining experience, lunch, and tell me your favorite place to go? Food connects people, right? We talk about that all the time. It's a universal language. It's the one that everybody connects with. So take some time to ask a colleague. And like this month being Hispanic Heritage Month, maybe do something fun. Maybe take a salsa class, a Zumba class, do something unique, something different, but do it with a friend who will appreciate it. And for most part, people, if you ask again with that authentic heart, that genuineness, their willingness to share their culture is probably there. So these are simple things, podcasts, movies, books, newspapers to open up. If you don't have the budget to travel, this is a great way to start learning. The one thing I also advise, Bernadette, if you're a parent, you have small children, start them at a young age.
Mhm.
Develop their food palate, right? I have so many friends who say, oh my God, my kids only eat macaroni and cheese and hot dogs. I'm like, well, you probably should have started their palate a little sooner because they just got accustomed. So if they start eating new foods at a young age and trying new foods, they're going to be a lot more open minded to when they start going out into the real world and tasting. But books your children read of different authors, different backgrounds, the movies they watch, things like that. So much you can do for a child without even the music they listen to, right? Is it Spanish music? Is it Asian music? Keep them, they are so like sponges at a young age that we can develop them that they won't even know the world differently if they start out at age 3 learning everything. They will only see the world as this beautiful multicultural world they live in, and they will learn to appreciate all the cultures that are surrounding them.
And as a side bonus of all of that wonderful learning and food and all of that great stuff, a side bonus is that when you give your brain mixed signals about what people look like and what people act like and who they are, your brain is less likely to form stereotypes. It's
That's
less
correct.
likely to have unconscious bias.
Hmm.
So, one of the solutions to unconscious bias is to expose yourself and your
Yeah,
children and the people that you love and anyone else that you can to different perspectives and different experiences and different ways folks celebrate because it gives our brain mixed signals. It's less likely to kind of put people in a box.
right.
And that's certainly something that I'm trying to do with my son, and I'm grateful that he lives in a community where there is a lot of diversity. And
Good.
that was always a priority for his other mom and I because we just think that it's incredibly important, especially as a kid with two moms. We
Hmm.
don't want, he at the end of the day, he's a white boy, and he is, even having two moms, has a lot of privilege. And we want to make sure that he is exposed to a lot of diversity as well. So great,
Good.
great point of view. Great tips. These are
Yeah.
tips that everyone can
Hmm.
use. And by the way, Seema, we put your dad's book in the chat.
Oh,
So speaking of
nice.
speaking of books that can introduce you and expose you to different
Hmm.
cultures, there's a memoir that you helped your dad write.
Correct. It took 3 years. So my father's 80 years old, a very ambitious man. He had suffered a stroke about 20 years ago. Left his left side a little bit weak, so he's in a wheelchair most of the day, but has a phenomenal attitude, and it shows that attitude can get you everywhere. But he's written 3 books, and his last one, which I helped him with, is his autobiography of his 80 years. And kudos to him. I can't remember what I ate for breakfast yesterday, and he remembers 80 years of his life. And I was like, Dad, this is amazing. So we put it together. It's great for the grandchildren to learn about their grandfather, how he came to this country with $8 in his pocket, and how he, was able to achieve so much. So thank you for putting that out there. He's very happy with it, and he's already on his 4th book. He's like, I got another idea, and I said, Dad, I don't think I have the energy for all this, but I got to give him credit, Bernadette, for his age. And if your parents have not done something like that, they have a great background to share. Writing a book is a great retirement activity, or videos of their life, their childhood, so that they can pass it on to generations. So good ways for them to keep the family history going.
I really love that you were able to do that with your parents. My parents passed about over 20 years ago now. So when I was relatively young, and it's really great that you have that sort of, written history, but oral
Yeah.
history for those as well. I mean, that's sort of an easier approach
Yes.
is to get some, there's even a thing called StoryCorps, but really
Hmm.
recording those stories and keeping those stories alive. And it's certainly something I wished I could have done with my parents, who were immigrants as well, but immigrants from Ireland with white
Hmm.
skin and a lot of privilege, even though they didn't see it at the time. So great. And I see we have a great comment here from Ramona. She does interviews and says that Ramona says that they love getting that question from candidates. It shows the candidates care and are invested in the company long term. And I think that,
Love it.
and Ramona's advice is great. Be transparent where your company
Hmm.
is in its stage
Agree.
of creating a safe environment. And I think that word, Ramona, is really important. Safe,
Yeah.
because one of what I feel like is my purpose on this planet is to create spaces where folks feel safe to be
Hmm.
authentically themselves. So
Correct.
really, really great comment.
Hmm.
We have a question here. Is this being recorded? So yes, this is going to stay live on
Hmm.
LinkedIn or recorded on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. So just go back to this link at
Yeah.
any point and you can rewatch it. We're also going to publish this on the 5 Things in 15 Minutes podcast. So if you
Hmm.
don't already subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, please check out and subscribe to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, and you will get an audio version of this show sometime in the next week or so. We also have another comment here. Commonly give my friends' kids age-appropriate books about cultural heroes, social events, and stories as birthday gifts. That's a great gift, an absolute great gift. Fantastic.
And it is a good gift. I have a standard book collection, 3 books. They are my go-to for anybody with children, birthday gifts, new baby. And it is culturally, it's about the Indian culture, different parts of India. And that's my gift. I'm like, you know what? Let me help you build your children's library to be a little bit more diverse. And it's something they probably wouldn't find on their own, but it's something I feel very comfortable to give to expand their children's thought process as well. And by the way, I love Ramona's comment on transparent. I think that's a phenomenal comment, because what happens is, if you're honest saying, we may not have this much DEI effort, but we're looking at it, I personally would be much more apt to go to a company that was honest with me than trying to say, oh yeah, we've got this whole thing, because it shows that, yep, you are wanting to do it, you're getting there, but it's okay, you're not there. And I think that is key. Do you know how many times I've won sales deals because of the fact that I'm just being straight up honest and saying, I can't do this, this is not my scope, but here's somebody who can, or I don't want to leave. I think it does set a great impression for that company. Whether they choose your company or not, at least they'll go knowing that these people are really, honest and candid about what they can and cannot do.
Exactly. Well, this has been a really great conversation, Seema. I don't see any other questions for us for the moment. If any of you have any follow-up questions, feel free to connect with either of us right on LinkedIn. I know that I'm happy to respond to questions through LinkedIn messages. I'm sure you are as well. Let me make sure I put your website up there, sevaglobal.com, so folks can see what else you're up to. You do really great stuff. I really love your creative approach to cultural competency, and you make it fun. And I think that's what is so important is folks are going to check out. They're going to tune out if the work isn't fun, if it doesn't have energy, if it doesn't have the spirit and the personality that you bring to it and the passion that you bring to it. So I am really thrilled to have you as a friend, to have you as a colleague, a referral partner. Thank you for sending people to us. And, I'm thrilled. I'm so glad we got to do this.
Absolutely, Brenda. It's always a pleasure to work with you, to have a fun conversation. I hope today's audience that you enjoyed it. It might have given you some food for thought, something to spark interest, take back to your company, take back to your personal life. But whatever you have, share with us. Of course, we're happy on email, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, text, whatever works for you, available through all of this. And like you said, Brenda, we need to change our thinking of learning. It's not always a traditional presentation. It's about how do we create an environment with the new generation that appeals to them, right? Not everybody learns the same way. So we want to make sure we're continuously elevating our learning approaches as well.
That's exactly right. So folks, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the great conversation, Seema. And for those who want to check out what we do, visit theequalityinstitute.com or check out my book, Inclusive 360. Thank you for joining us. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody. You are a great, great engaged audience today. So thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.